Hello, and welcome back. So today we're still going to continue on with our Viking knit weave. However, we're going to do something very different with it, okay? We are going to capture a stone with it. One of the reasons that I love this technique so much is that it will work for any type of stone, any shape of stone. If you want to capture a stone and you don't think that any other technique will work, this one will. This one will work on any stone at all. It's a lot of fun, but there's a reason that we're doing it second. There's a reason that we did regular Viking knit first, because when we do the regular Viking knit, we have the draw plate, and their draw plate is so forgiving. Anytime we have any unevenness in our stitches as we're weaving, our draw plate basically hides all of that. When we get into this, however, we cannot pull it through a draw plate. There is no hiding any inconsistencies. Every stitch you make as you make it is going to sit just like that on your finished piece, okay? So that's why first we practiced here, and now that this is familiar, we're moving on to something a little more advanced and a little less forgiving. Okay, so just to kind of explain how and why this works, when we're doing our cord, we do 5 stitches, or maybe you do 4 or 6 or whatever, but you do basically a limited number of stitches over and over and over and over again until you end up with this long chain, okay? This, believe it or not, is actually exactly the same stitch, except we're mounting it on something different, and there's only 3 rows of quite a few more stitches. And in fact, this piece I also brought down because it's actually only got 2 rows. I hope you can see that. There's 1 row that reaches up here and 1 row that reaches around the stone. So there's actually only 2 rounds of stitching on this piece, but my stone is still very securely captured. Okay, so that's basically the idea. That's how this works. So I want to demonstrate today on this guy here. Let's move some of this stuff out of the way. The first thing you need to start with is your frame that sits behind your stone. Okay, I've still got a cabochon here, but I mean, if you have a really odd, rough shape, choose your back, whatever is your largest, flattest side. I want that to be your back. So I've got my 18 gauge wire here. If you want to measure your stone, you can. I've had so much practice doing this that I'm just going to estimate. I need probably 3 or 4 extra inches on one side and 4 or 5 extra inches on the other. I don't know. I'm just gonna cut off a piece of wire that I know will be long enough. I do tend to need 1 tail. No, that's not true. Work in the middle. Sorry, I got to decide what I'm telling you here. It depends on how you do the top bail, whether you have a shorter one or a longer one, or whether they're about the same length. These are, I don't know, close enough to the same length. So now I'm actually holding onto my stone. This one's round, so I don't really have a top or a bottom. And I just start shaping the wire around my stone. That gives me a start. But what I don't want this wire to sit around the outside edge. I actually want it to sit just behind my stone, just like this. So I just need to slowly work this around, and I do spend like a few minutes doing this, okay? So don't try and rush this process. Don't be like, close enough. It's totally worth spending a few extra minutes. I just kind of use my finger to shape everything, and I'm constantly bringing my stone back in. I feel like I've got just too much of a bend here, and a little more bending over here. Something like that. It's coming. Making a perfect circle by hand is not an easy thing to do. So it takes practice, and it's not always going to be a circle. If you have an oval stone that you're using, then you need to create an oval, obviously. That's starting to look not too bad. All right. A little tweaking here and there. They're very subtle movements. That's looking pretty good. But I spent a couple minutes getting there. Like, I'm 5 minutes into the video right now. So, you know, take your time with this step. Don't try and rush it. From here, I need to put a sharp bend in both of these wires so that they're going straight up beside each other. Okay, so we've done this before, but let's do it again. I say that like we have an option, like we have a choice. All right, something like this. I'm sorry for the focus. There it goes. Now I'm gonna put my finger inside of this curve because I don't want that to change shape too much. Something like that. Now, before I make my next bend, I'm gonna flip it over and I'm just gonna see where I'm at. That's still looking pretty darn good. Nothing is springing out and away. There, you can see that better now, hey? So you'll notice that the outside of my wire follows the outside of the stone, but the stone can't go through it. It's just a little bit, you know, the inside of the wire is going to be skinnier. So that's pretty good. I'm just gonna bend this where it's at. Let's see. Something like that. You notice that this side of my plier jaws are about 1 wire thickness on this side of this wire, okay? And that's because I need room for this wire to poke up beside my other one. So bracing the inside of my circle with my thumb. Sometimes this top shoulder will have to be reshaped after this bend. That's not uncommon. I want to just straighten these two so they're not doing all this wonky crossing and stuff. Just kind of bend it out that way. There, that's better. So when I bring this together, let's see, unbend that just a tiny bit. Flatten everything out. I mean, if you want to go crazy, you could hammer this frame. That's totally up to you. Always, though, bring your stone back in. Constantly be... That's pretty darn good. I'm happy with that. So with this design, I'm going to just go right ahead and make my bail right now. So let's bring these up kind of fairly parallel. I'm looking for these pliers. I got a pile of pliers over here. All right. And I am going to... I'm going to put a bend. So again, I want just a short area here coming straight up from the top of my stone. And then I'm going to bend this in one direction. That's going to be my forward. Okay. And from here, I'm going to use my smaller jaw, so I stick it up there and make sure that these two are pressed flat against this jaw here. And then I bring this up and around the top and down the back of my pendant. And I do want to just squeeze that together, so get in here with my bent nose pliers. So my bent nose, because this way you can see what I'm doing. I'm literally just squeezing that together. My frame is almost flat, but not quite. Close enough. All right, let's continue on. There's my bail. Haha, it's mostly straight. Let's see what's going on. It's doing some funky stuff here now that I flip it around. Stick that back in there. I think that's going to be okay. Cool. Okay. That's looking straighter. Now my tail is a little crooked, but that's okay. We can straighten that out too. Okay. There we go. That's starting to look better. That's looking okay. That's looking straight. You really do have to flip these around and check every single angle, because sometimes, you know, you look at it from one way and it's all cockeyed back and you can't tell from this direction. So you'll always see me like holding my pendant upside down and sideways and backwards, because I'm really just trying to check all of those angles. Okay, from here, I like to do really simple backs on these without a whole bunch of extra anything. Can you see that? There's just a little curly Q on each side. And I basically did the same here, but it's not even a curly Q, it's just up. But it's sitting flush inside of my frame so that I don't have a wire edge that catches on anything. So that's why I can do that. But now that I'm happy with my bale, I'm just going to cut off these two tails because otherwise they'll be in my way later. Now you do want, if you want, you can put your bale makers back in here so that everything is lined up. Now I can decide how much I want to leave for a tail. I don't know, something like that. I'm just going to cut those off evenly. Something I don't do very often, but this is one of those moments where I'm going to. Alright, that's 18 gauge wire. That's not what I want. Here's my 24 gauge wire. Now, same like the other Viking knit, you actually do have to just cut a piece off because we're going to anchor one end to our frame and we need to sew with the other end because remember it's the same stitch we were doing in the last videos. So how much length you're going to need. This is another reason why it's really good to have a little bit of experience doing this, because how much wire you're going to need is going to depend on how big your stone is around. It's also going to depend even more on how thick your stone is. This is a really flat stone. I'm kind of hoping that I can do this with only about 2 rounds, but I want to make sure I have enough wire in case I need a third round, in case I have to go all the way around that a third time. I'm going to grab about 1 meter of wire because you can't really add wire to this design after you make it, so you just have to make sure that you have enough. And if that means you have a little bit extra, well, so be it. At least then you know you have enough. All right, I need to anchor the end of this little wire onto my frame, so we always do that by coiling a little bit. Let's coil around this one. 2, 3, those are really loose coils. I'm going to put one more in there for good measure. All right, my tail is totally here. All right, and I'm going to push this up into my bale. Oof, I'm having trouble here. Okay, push this up a little bit. Come on, up. There it goes. The reason I want it up just a little bit more is because now I'm going to go around my neck with this, okay? And that's going to bind everything together. So I do want to do a certain amount of pulling. If things aren't coming together real tight, you might have to just help it out. There, that's the way I want it to be. You got to kind of pull to make things tight. Ooh, things are going wonky there on me. There we go. Sometimes it'll help you to hold everything straight and square again, just to put that. And that's going to keep at least your bale square, if nothing else. All right, there, that's doing what I want. And I'm going to wrap around my neck until I'm here. All right, there, my frame is solid. I do want to, oh, my wires aren't the same length anymore, you see that? Let's make sure everything's in line here. Let me just trim that one ever so slightly. I do want them even. I'm actually going to do these tails right now so that they're just out of my way in general. Just want this flattened a little more in line. Okay, so I'm just going to curl each of these around with some round nose pliers. You can hear my piles of pliers kicking around. I've got to grab onto the ends, so let's make some space to grab on there. And so remember, grab with the end just flush to your pliers. And now I'm just going to twist this out. And because they are the same length, they should look about the same when I'm done, as long as I'm grabbing on with the same point on my plier jaws so I get the same size of loop. All right, that's about what I want. I do want to like bend these down so that they're in line with my frame, and they're going to sit flat against my stone. There we go. That's looking better. There we go. Okay, I'm happy with that. My front is here, okay? So at this point, let's just bring this in and make sure everything's still looking okay. This smoky quartz is so clear I can actually see my tails in the back. So that's another reason you want those to kind of look the same, or at least look nice. The same is not necessary. But so far things are looking good. I'm gonna stick my stone down now, and my wire's coming in this direction, so I am going to work this way around my frame. What I'm going to do, oh, I was just finding the end of my long wire here, so that's what took me a minute. But so I've got my back and my front, which isn't super obvious right now, but my bail is flat on the back and it's sticking out on the front. So when I have this on here, it's all kind of in line. So that's how I know the difference between my back and my front. So I'm going to take my tail here, that's all attached to this long weave wire. I'm going to sew from back to front, and then there's like a big loop right here. I'm going to sew through this loop towards the back. Now I'm going to pull this, pull. Now this next thing I'm going to show you is not 100% mandatory. I find using a little spacer piece like this is going to go a long way to helping me keep my weave consistent. That's why I use this. Using a spacer like this does make it more awkward and is not 100% necessary. If you do use a spacer, you actually don't put it in this loop. You actually put it in this little space next to the loop, right in there. I'm going to push it up like this. I kind of hold it between two fingers underneath it here. And now this last tension pulling is a little bit delicate and takes some practice. But that's what I want, something like that. Okay? I'm finding my wire end again. I'm sewing from back to front and then through this loop, this giant loop that I've made. Gently pulling. Once I kind of get this smaller shape, I bring my spacer back in again, not in this loop, but next to the loop, and kind of touching my frame, okay? Now I want to bring this down around my spacer and kind of pull this tight. This is super awkward. I have had students that are like, that spacer is terrible, that's not helping at all. And they can just estimate and make it look close enough that they're happy with that. Let's see, where are we at? I think that's going to be, it's a little bit loose, but that's going to be okay. These can slide on your frame a little bit too. So that's how we get the spacing around our frame to work out perfectly, is just by adjusting these spaces a little bit. All right, finding the end of my wire again, sewing from the back to the front, and then through this loop. I like to do this all at once. If that's confusing for you, you can sew from the back to the front and then find your loop and then sew through it afterwards, but it's just one extra step. So again, beside your loop, touching the frame, I like to bring this down around my little spacer, my high-tech spacer tool, which is really just a 10 gauge piece of wire, but anything can be used, anything round can be used. All right, that one's looking good. Let me find the end of my wire again, back to front, and then through there. Once it starts to get small, move your spacer over. I'm just slowly working around my frame. So let's shape this around my spacer. There we go. That's not looking too bad. Find my wire end, back to front, and now through this giant loop. You gotta trust me that there's a loop there. I know you can't see it. All right. There we go. Let's move the spacer over. Bring this around my spacer. This is a little bit finicky. Takes practice to get this looking even, but that's not too bad. All right, find my wire end again. Back to front and through this giant loop. All right, we're getting there. We're already halfway around our frame. like everything in jewelry making, there's always a certain amount of repetition. But that repetition is actually what our eye finds so appealing. That aesthetically pleasing feeling we get from a really well-made piece of jewelry comes from repeating patterns and the symmetry between those repeating patterns. I don't know if you've ever heard, but our faces are fairly symmetrical, but better looking people, these are my air quotes, better looking people tend to have more symmetrical faces. It's that symmetry that our mind recognizes and likes. That's part of the reason why odd numbers are so good for designing. The psychology behind odd numbers is, in our minds, we like to pair things up. We like to match things up. I don't know why, we have 2 legs, we have 2 arms, we have 2 eyes. I think, there's just something about the human brain that really likes to match things up and make pairs. And so if you have 2 of the same thing out, your mind sees them and it's just like, oh, there's a pair, and your mind moves on immediately. It's happy. It's made its pair. It can go on to other things that it wants to think about, okay? When you have 3, that's 4. When you have 3 of something out, whether it's a display on a shelf, whether it's 3 wraps, your eyes linger on it. And they linger on it because they're trying to make a pair, and they can't because there's 3 of them. That odd number means that they can't just easily pair things up. So then your eyes keep playing around those 3 objects because they're looking for more minute details so that they can pair things up. Maybe there's another detail, like there's 2 of one flavor and a third one that's another flavor, and then your mind can pair those up into the one pair and then an odd one out, and then your mind will be happy and can move on. But if they look closer and their eye plays around it longer and they still don't find any distinguishing feature between them that allows them to pair things up, it just means you're buying time. You're with their eyes on your piece. They're going to continue looking at your piece longer, trying to make those pairs. And when it can't, it's just going to keep trying. So that's why odd numbers work in display, because it really comes down to psychology. I don't know. It's super interesting. That's the best I can explain that. I know you'll hear all the time odd numbers, but not many people tell you why odd numbers are so effective. So I hope that's a little bit of psychological insight into odd numbers. All right. So I'm working. I'm getting there. I'm almost all the way around. Couple more here, I think we'll be there. All right, let's get it not in that loop, but next to the loop. All right, what's going on here? It's catching on my tails here. I want to bring this around. I've got my little tail from the very start of my wrap. I can cut this off now because, whoops, I've got so much else going on here that it's not going to go anywhere. Get right in there. Cut a piece of wire off, so I do want to make sure that cut end isn't poking out. Cool. Okay. Back to where I was. I was over here. I dropped my spacer in here. Let's finish tightening this guy up. There we go. One more, I think, and I'll be all the way around. Up from the back to the front, through that loop. Once your loop is a kind of a manageable size. Okay, so one thing here, I've got my little tail loopy touching my frame, and I'm actually going to just bend it away for just a second. I can put it back later, but it's because I need this wire to actually come through in there. Okay, so let's move my spacer over, right like that. There we go. Okay, so I've basically gone all the way around. I am probably going to want one more here, bridging from where it is to where, from bridging this gap. I hope that's clear. But before I do that, let's bring my stone back in. And centering it on my frame, I want to start to bring these around my stone, okay? It's not going to capture it. It might not even reach up the sides. These ones are going to reach up the sides. I think I am going to be able to just do 2 rounds on this one to show you guys. But that's basically what we want. We're just starting to shape this here, okay? Now I'm grabbing the end of my wire again, and I'm going from the back to the front, except this time I want to sew through this very first petal, okay? It comes through here, and then I've still got a loop I'm going to sew through. Hang on, things are all twisted here. There. Let's sew through this loop. There we go. That's what I want it to look like. Pull, pull, pull till I have a loop. Now, I have to admit that I only use my spacer on that very first round going around, because this is the round that kind of establishes the spacing, and if that very first round is super uneven, there's no way that any of the subsequent rounds are going to be even. So I basically only use this spacer when I go around that very first time. Now that I'm on my second round though, I am going to just use these little petal tops as my spacers. Now I've paused here because I also want to show you this piece. See how it's sticking up over the bail? It's really, really super easy for this to slip behind the bail. Don't let it. You want to make sure this entire loop stays in front of the bail, all of it. Okay, let's see. And I'm gonna start to like fold it around the bail. All right. This is a tension thing. You want to make this loop kind of about the right size. What the right size is going to depend on you. Okay, so that's all subjective. Now, when I go to bring this over, I actually like to bring it over my stone. And you see that little loop that's created? That looks probably kind of familiar from the last videos. I'm just holding my stone in place. Okay. Now, as I work around to my next petal here, I'm still going from back to front, but as these start to curve around my stone, it looks a lot less like back to front and a lot more like outside to inside, okay? Which is just how it goes with this. So now we're going outside to inside, which is still back to front. And by coming on top of this wire, I'm already sewing through my loop. You're gonna have to take my word for that, but it's true. So sewing from outside to inside, I'm pulling in this direction until my loop is the right size, and that's subjective. Oh, I just dropped my stone. That's okay. Come on, a little tighter. Put my stone back in here. There we go. And that's about the right size. I'm going to bring this over my stone and cross and make that loop. Okay. At this point, it's easier to hold my stone because I can push it up into these two wraps, and it's going to stay kind of in place. So that's how I'm holding it so securely in one spot. Got the end of my wire again, going outside to inside through that next one and over top of this tail, which it kind of wants to do at this point, which is nice and handy. All right, so now I pull it in this direction. Ignore this tail. Pull it in this direction until that loop is the right size. If you're having like real trouble with this, you know, it's not the end of the world if you have to bring some pliers in and help you shape that. But okay, I'm happy with that. Now I bring this tail over my stone and make that loop. I know I make that look really easy. You really want these loops to sit flat against your stone. You don't want them like sticking up on their side. Moving on to the next little loop from round one here. And I'm kind of just moving my stone around to make this easier. I think that's a good size there. Pull this around my stone and make that loop. All right, looking good. Just gonna keep working away around my stone here. Make sure my loops aren't catching on my plier handles that are kicking around. Let's get those out of the way. All right. Sometimes you can help push your loop a little bit. About there. There we go. Pull it around over my stone. Make sure my stone is still pretty much in place. All right, find the end of my wire, into the next one. Outside to inside, over top of where your wire finishes the last loop. Pulling it about the right amount. And then bringing this around and crossing. And that kind of pulls these petals around your stone too. Looking good. I'm pushing this now instead of here, I'm pushing it kind of into here, kind of in the middle of what I've done. All right, grab my wire end again, outside to inside, over top of this other, where the wire comes out. Right size of loop, cross over the front. I'm just going to keep doing this as I work around my stone. And then I do want to just show you all of this because I want to show you how I like to finish my weave wire so that it's kind of hidden. All right, and you see how this kind of gets a bit faster with a little bit of practice. Well, that's a tad small, but I'm okay with that. Almost done. There we go. Now, if this round only reached up the side of my stone and didn't reach around the front like this, I would have to go around and do one more round just like this one so that my stone was securely captured. Sometimes if you got a really fat stone, or maybe your first row was really small and tight and just didn't grow as much this way, you might even have to do 4 or 5 rows depending on, you know, the shape of your stone and how thick everything is and how tall you make each of these. So this is wanting to go around the back of my bale. I have to not let it. I want to keep it always in front of my bale. Make that the right size, bring it around. I need one more to make this look even. So even though this was like my crossing one and I have to like get my nail under it to get even underneath of it. Yeah, no. Where is my tack? Here's my tack. Bring in my super specialized tool. Create a space right where I need it. Now I'll be able to sew from outside to inside and over top, creating my very, very last little loopy-doop. There we go. Crossing there. Stop. Take a look. How even do things look? I'm pretty happy with this. This actually is pretty good. So from here, making sure that this is crossed fully, flatly in front, I am going to start to, so what I actually want to do with this tail is I want to sew underneath of, I need my tack, of all of your rows of weaving here and bring it back to our frame, because that's how we're going to finish this wire, is weave it through our frame. There it goes. So I've just gone underneath the 2 layers of weaving there. And I kind of bring this down. You don't want this to kink too bad. Sometimes I can bring it like right down. I don't want to get it underneath this guy. Not for any particular reason, just because I think that'll look better. There we go. And bring this around again, reshaping that. What's going on here? Oh, that's that. Okay. I do want to bring this out a little bit more. There. That's where I want it to sit. So it kind of looks somewhat even, and they can't really see where things go. So at this point, I'm actually just going to cut. I've got way too much wire here, but at least I know I would have had enough if I had to go around a 3rd time. So from here, I need to sew underneath my frame, so that means between the rock and my frame. Oop, there we go. Now this is a bit tricky. Your wire is going to want to kink here, and you have to not let it. I know you're probably Not super impressed when I say that. It wants to do that and don't let it. What does that even mean? Well, it just means slowly working your wire through. Everything still looks good in the front. From here, I really just want to coil it around my frame. If you want, you could sew these to your frame with it. I'm not even gonna. I'm just gonna press those down to my stone when I'm done. And I'm just gonna coil around my frame. How many times? 3 guesses? 3 times, exactly. All right. 1 coil. Oops. 2 coils. And I find 3 is kind of a minimum to be secure. If you want to do more than that, go crazy. But I find 3 is just about right. Make sure they're all pulled super tight, every single coil. I'm going to get rid of this tail. All right, from here, I am just going to press these down. And that's it. That's our pendant. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that worked well for you. If you have any questions, please do let me know. Have a wonderful day.